Got to be able to bet on yourself.
Hey, this is William Tincup. Listen, we did a series for iSolved called Heroes of HR, where we talk to HR practitioners, and these are just your run-of-the-mill, everyday, slogging it out, 300 employees in Cedar Rapids HR pros. Mostly, it's centered around iSolved and what they do with iSolved, but also they talk a lot about kind of the day-to-day rigor of HR. If you're curious about that, search for Heroes of HR wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you.
And say, you know what, I have about 70% of what is needed for that role. You have to be able to bet on yourself and know that the things that are in you that got you to this place can propel you to the next. And if it doesn't, guess what? I guarantee you're going to pick up some valuable learning and some new skills and some new experiences that may not take you to that next place, but guess what? It's going to propel you, even if it means I'm continuing to learn and grow and develop. It's going to propel you forward.
Welcome to Backstage Pass with the HR Rockstar, the show that pulls back the curtain and cranks up the volume on the most pressing HR topics, from talent strategies and workplace culture to career pivots and leadership. Because in today's world, HR isn't just behind the scenes, it's center stage. I'm your host, Jay Arnold, and in the world of HR and talent, there are times you recognize top performers within the workplace, sometimes referred to as rock stars. This podcast combines my love of HR as my career with my experience of 10 plus years performing shows around Michigan and the Midwest in my rock band, chasing the dream of being an actual rock star. Join me as I sit down with rock stars in their fields to have fun, insightful conversations that keep the human in human resources. Together we'll disrupt, innovate, and amplify the future of work. So grab your pass, turn it up, and let's make some noise. Joining me at the podcast is Marvin Figaro, Director of Strategic Partnerships at a major global staffing firm. Marvin leads key initiatives focused on creating more inclusive hiring practices, including second chance hiring programs. He brings a wealth of insight in his background in talent acquisition and how these efforts benefit not just individual candidates, but entire teams and organizations. Hi, Marvin, and welcome to the show. I'm so glad that we were able to connect and do this. We recently met at an HR conference, and I truly enjoyed your session. I thought, we should continue that conversation on the podcast. So I'm so happy we're finally able to connect.
Yeah, no, thanks, Jay. Really appreciate the opportunity to sit with you today. And like you said, meeting at the event, had some great conversation, and just looking forward to continuing that today.
As we get started, can you give everyone a brief overview of your background and a little bit of your career history?
I currently work for a global staffing workforce. People call it staffing, but we've evolved into a workforce management company. Been in staffing for 20 plus years. Started my career as a recruiter. For most of that time, I've been involved in talent acquisition or recruiting in some form or fashion, right? I've led recruiting and sourcing teams. I've been an individual contributor, worked in operations. So, I like to say I'm a recruiter at heart, right? No matter where I end up in my career, I'm always thinking of people first and thinking people centric in terms of that overall talent experience. In my current role, I lead what is called our Equity at Work initiative and related programs like Kelly 33, which is our second chance, fair chance hiring program. And essentially, I consult with our clients to find ways to identify opportunities, to remove barriers, really to create more equitable access to employment opportunities for communities and individuals that are typically overlooked in the talent market.
Yeah, I'd like to dive into that a little bit more. I know you touched on it at the HR conference we were at recently, because I think that's a really underserved market, and on top of being the right thing to do, we had talked a little bit at that conference about this, and I've talked about it on other podcasts, and it's kind of a common practice is a case-by-case basis. I know there's certain cities and states with ban-the-box laws that have removed some of those barriers. So, of course, if you're in those municipalities or areas, you'd have to adhere to local and state regulations. But I think what you're doing with that initiative is really something special. I think more companies might follow suit. Maybe we can just dive a little bit more into that and what that looks like for candidates and organizations.
Yeah, no, happy to do that. If we start from the beginning, right, when we think about where a lot of this stems from, and, in a lot of instances, not all, but in a lot of instances, companies are operating off of old tapes. So at some point, there was policy in place that was trying to mitigate some level of risk. And it's typically negligent hiring, right? It's the idea that a reasonable company should know or should have taken the steps to prevent X, right? Whatever X is. And I would say most, if not all companies, they have some type of policy in place to mitigate that, minus the background screen, right? So if you think about workplace violence, you think about harassment and anti-harassment policies and all these other policies that are in place at organizations. Again, it's not a complete cover or umbrella for everything, because there are instances where you're looking at things like there might be some federal or state requirement depending on role, right? Or there may be some additional safety and risk that's associated with it. Those things, again, like you said, should be evaluated on a case-by-case basis. But if you really think about, at one point, we were doing 10-year background screens, meaning 10 years county of residence and so on, criminal background screens. And at some point, state laws changed and it was, moved down to 7 years, which is the current quote unquote standard. In some places, it's 5 years. There are some companies that do 3, some companies do none, right? So if you think about where we were and where we are now, what makes 7 years this standard for mitigating the risk, right? And again, every company has to evaluate that based on their own, where they find themselves and their own risk tolerance. But the idea behind it and what you and I have discussed and what I work diligently every day as I'm consulting with clients is to help them understand that, to your point, if you look at everything adjudicated on a case-by-case basis, including job relatedness, level of risk, nature of crime, right? You will find that there are instances where individuals who've had some justice involvement, right, are obviously qualified because we're doing that assessment and that screening and all those things first, right? So it's only when we get to the point of actually we've extended an offer and now we're doing the background screen. So in that entire process, we've determined that this person is qualified and can do this job. And the only thing that would prevent them from moving forward is something popping up on their background screen. To me, that idea of discarding talent based on those types of reasons seems a little bit arbitrary. And number one, we're really not doing ourselves any service in this talent market that we're in, right? Where there's the shortage of skills, there's a shortage of talent to fill roles. I mean, if you look at any company's open roles right now, it's in the hundreds, right? Depending on size, right? But if you start really talking about global and really large organizations, it's in the thousands. So there are thousands of roles that are open. And for no other reason, for some of them, we're not filling them because of these arbitrary rules, whether it's, requiring post-secondary degrees for roles that don't need them. That's another thing, our organization did before we took this to market, is really evaluated our own processes in-house. So we looked at our roles, we looked at what we had in our job description. And again, without going too far into it, we really kind of evaluated what is the skills that's needed for the work and whether or not a degree enhances that, is necessary, and so on and so on. So I say that with all of these barriers, right, that's in that talent process, if we were to take a close look at those and really assess those in an honest and in a way that obviously pulls in, all the stakeholders, you would find that a lot of times we are, like you said, excluding a lot of talent and a lot of communities, underserved, overlooked talent in the marketplace that, quite honestly, they're not looking for special favors. They're not asking to be given a job. What they want is the opportunity to compete for the job. And we've talked about 2 categories, right? Another category that's often not talked about is individuals living with disabilities, particularly individuals living with IDD, right? Developmental disabilities, right? So there's the visible and the invisible. And the idea, again, of human potential, right? That capability that's being overlooked, again, not because we've done, the work to screen and assess and evaluate that this person is qualified and capable for this job, but simply based on those factors that I mentioned. So, when I'm looking at these things, I really try to look at it holistically, right? Those things are common, right? The ones that we've pointed out, education and drug screening and things like justice involvement and disabilities. But I mean, barriers could be a host of other things, socioeconomics, childcare, transportation, all of those things present, barriers to individuals that are looking for work.
You touched on something I think that a lot of companies are looking into to change, some faster than others, is like you said, kind of like the old model or the old tape, right? Of even just the applicant tracking system can be a barrier to entry.
Absolutely.
Depending on what platform it is. There's people first, it could be the first question on the application is, have you ever committed a felony? If you click yes, it might be an automatic disqualifier. Depending on the industry, the organization, if you're handling cash, there's a number of host of reasons. And that's why some of those regulations at the state and local levels have changed. But there's other ones too. Even certain platforms, you can't move forward unless you put in your high school graduation year or your college graduation year.
Yeah.
And you can't even leave it blank and just move forward because, one, you're uploading your resume and then you have to retype everything, which is a whole other discussion in itself about the candidate experience. I've seen people say, well, putting in my college years I attended and graduated, if I followed the traditional path, graduated high school, did 4 years of college, graduated. Okay, you can kind of do some simple math and going, well, they graduated around 18, went to school, probably 22, 23, and then they've been working for 20 years. That puts them over 40. Oh, that's a protected class. I don't want to interview this person. Red flag right there. Risk management.
That happens. And I'll tell you, in as much as I've recruited and sourced and led teams, as I mentioned before, you learn a lot and you hear a lot over the years, right? And you end up doing a lot of coaching, right? And a lot of nudging with some of your stakeholders around these ideas of what, they want to bring into the organization. And it's not just the current organization that I'm in right now. I mean, I've been with several and it's incredible. And sometimes it's a little bit of ignorance, right? A lack of knowledge. It's not that their intent is to be malicious, right? They have an idea of a view of what success looks like and what good looks like, and they've never deviated from it, right? Some of the things that you referenced, I the first question I tend to start with when I'm engaging with clients, for the first time, particularly those who've expressed some interest in the Equity at Work program, when we start talking about the barriers, is why? Why do you have, degree requirements for these roles, or why are you drug tested? Because I want to meet them where they are and understand the purpose for that the process is in place that's creating the barrier. The other interesting thing too that you referenced in terms of individuals who are justice involved is statistically the numbers are staggering, right? So the 33 that I referenced in that Kelly 33 is 33% of the working adult U.S. population has had some type of justice involvement. That's 1 in 3 people that at some point or the other have had some type of justice involvement, over 70 million people. So let's think about that for a second in terms of that number alone and the number of jobs that we have open, right? And if we, again, we're diligent and intentional with our assessments and looking at things in the way you reference on a case-by-case job related, nature of crime, we could really alleviate, number one, that shortage of talent, right, to fill those roles. But number two, more importantly, and I think this is where a lot of times the view is not there. We have a very narrow view, right? So opening up that view a little bit, think about the impact that would have on individuals who are actually able to, number one, be employed, but number two, be able to take that employment, create stability, and now look at launching into career opportunities that can really build their economic mobility, right? The contributions that they'll make back into their communities in terms of dollars spent and potentially owning a home and all the ripple effects that come with the stability of career employment. So those things alone have a multiplier effect by simply just evaluating, again. And I'll tell you this, I might have shared this at the event we were at together. We collect a lot of data, internal data and some external data. The challenge with external data is that it's not comprehensive. It comes from a number of different sources. But we've been working with some organizations that do advocacy and support for justice involved individuals, trying to kind of look at centralized, more comprehensive data. But even in the data that we have from our own employment, data. Turnover, comparatively. So when we look at pre-implementation versus post-implementation and then compared to clients who have not implemented at all, it is clear, right? Turnover goes down significantly. So if you're talking in a typical light industrial environment, assembly and manufacturing, that sort of thing, turnover is usually around 30-35%, right? We've seen that knocked down to like 10, 12, 9%, right? Time on assignment, as we track things like that, tenure is longer, right? But more importantly, we're able to fill roles faster, right? Because we're getting more talent into the funnel, firstly, but then secondly, we're eliminating what sometimes, depending on county and depending on location, could be a 2, 3, 4-week, 5-week process just to get information back on someone's screen or someone's educational background or all the things that make up that screen. So again, when we look at it holistically, it's great for talent, it's great for us, and it's great for our clients. The hurdle and the hump is always getting over and helping people understand and removing that stigma, right? The thoughts that are associated, well, what would happen if, right? And again, when we show the data in terms of incident safety or otherwise, it's negligible when compared to populations that don't have any justice involvement, right? So to me, it's clear. I always share this thought when I'm talking to clients. If you think about that number, over 70 million, 1 in 3, statistically, the chances are that someone working in your organization right now has had some type of justice involvement is very high. We just don't know about it because we haven't gone past that 7-year threshold, or for whatever reason, they might have, came in through some other means, right, through the front door, but we just don't know about it. And then I'll just say this, because I think you raised a really, really important point about when you look at the resume or you upload or you fill out your application and ask for certain things. One of the things, especially around education, and this is not by any means a knock on education, I think there are absolutely necessary degrees and roles that require you should have that level of higher learning. But particularly with the example that you gave, what's the value of a 20-year degree right now? And that's something that's very hard to answer, right? If I have 2 candidates that I'm looking at, and comparatively, I've evaluated and determined they both can do the job, but I'm making a decision, or one might be leaning, more heavily into some of the things that we're looking for in terms of skills and, capacity and that sort of thing. But I'm making a decision based on my JD that says, oh, they must have a bachelor's degree, and that bachelor's degree is 20 years old. What is the value of a 20-year-old bachelor's degree when comparing those 2 candidates? And it's hard to quantify because there is none, right? Because if you have not kept up with, kept current, right, in terms of your learning and continuous learning, what you learned 20 years ago is really not effective in today's environment.
Yeah. And what you mentioned of it's a win situation across the board. I mean, like you said, look at that does at the micro and macro level of the economy, local, state, and federal, like having people working, contributing, like you said, becoming homeowners, renting, anything, spending money on vacations, grocery, all the things that make economies work at the local, state, and federal level, right? And it's a win. I mean, on one hand, again, you're mitigating risk, but at the same time, there's an untapped resource. And I think companies and programs like what you are part of and others similar in other fields, they're onto something. And like you said, having that case by case basis is really, I think, I don't want to say an industry standard, but it seems to be going that way where it's like, it's not black or white. There are lots of shades of gray,
Absolutely.
just like life, And in your experience of working with, within talent acquisition and other areas of HR, what does modern talent acquisition look like to you? And how's it evolved over the past few years, whether it's pre-COVID, that whole discussion of the hiring boom coming out of it. And now here we are, halfway through this decade, and technology is changing, it seems like, on a daily basis.
Yeah, no, that's a really, really great question, Jay. And I'll tell you, it's hard to say, even with the advances that we've had in technology, that it's easier or more difficult, right? Anyone who's been in talent acquisition more than 15 years has heard this term, the war for talent, the war for talent. That's all we heard about, for the last 2, and in some cases 3 decades. And without completely dating myself, when I started in recruiting, we had one system that was DOS based that all it told you was which file to go to if you needed a mechanical engineer, right? So it was file cabinet X and it was in this section, and that's how you searched on this one system that we all used. So I've seen that version of recruiting where we would send resumes by fax and we would get orders, requisitions from clients by fax, to now where we are, where you have AI really, really kind of at the cusp of changing the way recruiting and talent acquisition is going to operate going into the future, right? And for some, the change might have negative impacts, but I think for others, it's going to have some really positive impacts, right? As I look at where we kind of sit on this precipice of, AI is not only able to, do some of those simple repetitive tasks in terms of going out and, sourcing and kind of scraping the web and serving up, talent for recruiters to do the, more engaging work of connecting with talent and building those relationships and building that trust. But there's going to be a point where, AI, when I look at agentic AI and I look at, natural language processing and, some of the, beyond the kind of large language model where you can kind of type in, fix my, my outgoing email to this individual, right? When you start building AI into your workflows now, it's going to take a lot of that upfront work that recruiters were involved in and sources were involved in, and do it at scale a lot more efficiently, right? The question is, how good is it going to be, and how good is it going to evolve over time, where that initial engagement is so seamless that talent, whether it's you or I, is interacting with AI in a way that doesn't even matter to us anymore. It doesn't seem robotic, right? It doesn't seem like, when I call into the call center, I have to deal with this robot before I get to a human, right? It's so seamless and it's so well done that it wouldn't even matter, right? But when we get to that human, now we've taken care of all of those kind of upfront, like I said, pieces. It's going to enhance the process in such a way that I think it'll create a better experience for all, meaning talent and recruiters. But with that said, recruiters now have to adapt, right? They have to adapt. I remember when I led recruiting teams like 6 years ago, and what I would say to my team, it's not enough to just be able to pick up the phone and engage and be personable and understand, depending on what discipline you sat in, whether it was engineering or IT or marketing, understand how to sell product, meaning, you understand enough about engineering so you can engage in a conversation with this engineer. That was not enough. At that point, you had to be part recruiter, sourcer, and recruiter, part, marketeer, right? You had to have some marketing principles in terms of, okay, I have this requisition. I know what the hiring manager is looking for, right? Ben, that's the other part of it too, kind of being that consultant and building that, trusted partner relationship with your hiring managers, right? So those three pieces. But now that I have this, how do I go out and identify those individuals, and how do I engage them? Because the way I would engage someone who's in light industrial space, manufacturing and assembly and that sort of thing, is different from how I'm going to engage, software or cyber network engineer that's, making 180,000 a year or 200,000 a year. That's a very different approach, right? Even in terms of my initial outreach. So we had to start thinking with some marketing principles in terms of what is the persona and how am I going to get them to, connect with my initial outreach on LinkedIn. So in those ways, recruiting has evolved greatly and in a lot of great ways, But I'll say this, regardless of where we were in the beginning when I started and how we evolved over time, I think the secret sauce is still that human in the loop, right? The conversation that you and I built when we met can't be replaced by AI, right? That level of trust and relationship, I when I recruited, whether as an individual contributor or leading teams, I've had individuals that I brought into the organization as 10 years later, and we're on a Zoom call. They're like, hey, Marvin, how's it going? I haven't seen you in a while. Remember you brought me in 10 years ago? And I'm like, yes, but I don't remember them because I've brought in so many people, right? But the fact that, you know, our connection, right, and the way that experience that they had sat with them, because they could have came on that call and just said hi and, kept it moving. But it's the idea that connection and that experience sat with them enough that they wanted to remind me, hey, it's good to see you. you brought me in 10 years ago. So that human in the loop, that's still going to be the secret sauce.
I'll be honest, that's happened to me before. And whether it's on a Teams call or Zoom call or in person, and I would try my hardest to just kind of and I'd kind of try to find their badge either around their neck or hang on their side going, I cannot remember their name for the life of me. And I felt horrible, but I was like, but yeah, you've touched someone and they landed with you and they're in their role. And it does bring a sense of pride and value. Like here they are 10 years later, 5 years later, whatever it is. And they remember you because you helped place them. That's great. One topic I want to jump in on is, DEI is really under attack right now. And if we look back, some companies, might have saw this as a trend and go, we got to get on this bandwagon. The administration comes in, then they go, well, we're going to cancel everything so we don't lose contracts. And some people said, well, like anything, it starts from a good place. And some people take it too far. Some people took, some companies are doing it right. But I know a number of years ago, you wrote a really great piece about the shared responsibility in DEI. And I thought maybe you could expand on what that means in practice, especially in today's environment where it really is misunderstood. Some companies admittedly have done things incorrectly, and that's not what it was supposed to be.
Right.
And people want to have fairness. So they think it's one thing. On a previous episode with Dr. Lee Meadows, him and I talked briefly about it. And one thing that some people didn't realize is like the E for equity. Some farmers realized they were part of that program, and their small family farm was given a shot to compete with corporate farms. They think it's one thing and it could be something very different. And also, like you said before, disabilities.
Right.
So I thought, we could just talk in your experience with that and, related to that and kind of go from there.
Yeah, no. And it's a great topic. It's one that I think we need to talk about more. For the reason you referenced, there's a lot of misunderstanding, right? So I'm not going to qualify and give technical terms and break down what DEI truly means, right? Like you said, when it's done right. But I'll say this, and this is my opinion. DEI has been around in a version or the other for 30 plus years, right? A lot of the things that we have in corporate and other work environments right now came out of some version of DEI asking a question or pushing against a policy or process that was in place, right? In order to make it equitable, right? So that idea of 2020, when we had the murder of George Floyd and the subsequent kind of social upheaval and unrest and reckoning that came from that, where you saw a lot of organizations make a lot of public statements and, spun up, marketing and PR around it. I'm not going to question their intent because I don't know. I think I like to start with positive intent is where I always start my thoughts. I would assume positive intent with them, that they really wanted to do well. Fast forward to where we are today, even prior to the election and subsequent EOs from the White House, even prior to that, you saw this kind of leveling out, right, of DEI in a lot of organizations. Why? Because without a lot of really rigorous process and program behind DEI, you get a lot of performative actions and you get what we've talked about, which is, some of them in some cases were illegal and in other cases just really not good for overall culture and inclusion building anyway, right? So that I just wanted to set that table for us, right, in terms of grounding us in the understanding of where we are today. So for me, if you were doing the work in terms of looking at cultures of inclusion and belonging, right, because at the end result of all of this, again, is people, right? When you think about whether you make widgets or you sell a service, you create a product, without people, that does not happen. Right. And whether you want to use the acronym or you want to, say the words out, diversity, equity, and inclusion, it's the idea that, not Marvin's opinion now, this is statistically proven, people produce more, they give more of their discretionary effort, meaning when I come to work, there's amount of, engagement that I have with work and with the organization and wanting to do well and want my team to do well and want the organization. So all of that put together, right? When people feel included and they have that sense of belonging and they're engaged and they feel cared for, they produce more. That is a fact. The stats bear that out, that companies who have figured this out better than their competitors outpace them in terms of revenue and results and innovation. And we can go on and on and on, right? So there's tons of data out there that if people wanted, they can Google themselves. So it's the idea that if it's centered around people, what is our obligation as organizations to ensure that our people feel, and all our people, right, feel engaged and connected and that sense of belonging. So with that being said, when you think about DEI in terms of the diversity, equity, and inclusion, diversity represents a spectrum, right? Not just race and ethnicity and gender and identity and so forth. You can have diversity within the most monolithic group because we all have different lived experiences. I might be living with an invisible disability that I'm not sure. So there's diversity, right? In any aspect of what we're talking about. Where we get tripped up a lot of times is in representation. Right? So what does representation look like in the organization at different levels compared to, let's say, representative of the country as a whole, right? So if you have a percentage of X, in the country as a whole, how is that represented in the organization? Is that represented at the entry level, mid-level, senior level? So that's where we get tripped up on this idea that, representation looks like this. And as a result, companies started to react in ways, again, that weren't always illegal, but sometimes it was performative and damaging to the overall culture. Versus, again, I firmly believe when done right, what we're talking about creates opportunity. It creates access, right? And when you create access and opportunity, and we're not even talking about the hiring now, we're talking about in your organization where people can truly bring their best thoughts and ideas and innovations and compete, right? Then you get the best from everyone. So from that perspective, to me, the attack on DEI, I think, companies are at a point now where they're evaluating what is legal and how much risk tolerance they have. And because I would say, and I'm not going to put a percentage on it, but a large percentage of companies were operating legally. Nothing they were doing was illegal. You might have had some, one-offs here and there that were doing some things, whether intentionally or unintentionally, that were illegal, right? But for the most part, companies were operating legally. But that's not even the case right now. It's not about what is legal. It's how much capital and resources do you want to stack against defending what you know to be legal, right? And how much risk you want to assign to that? Because now I'm taking time, I'm taking resources, I'm taking focus off of what I should be doing to run the business to defend this. So that's where we find ourselves. And quite honestly, what I've seen is, for some is a walk back. And if it's easy to walk back based on, the current trend, then you really weren't committed to the work anyway, right? Because these trends come and go, right? For others, it's more of a pivot and a reframe, right? But the work continues. And for some, they're doubling down. I think, there's list out there of the ones that are publicly stated their commitment. And that's great because at the end of the day, I think we can all agree on one thing. That is the things that you need to bring your full self to work, whatever that means to you, and the things that you need to thrive at work, right, will be different from what I need and different from what somebody else's need. And it's the idea that how is that environment being created where we can have those needs, right, in the context of work and have those needs met, and we all can, have that sense of connection and engagement and inclusion and belonging. Because I think when you get that right, at the end of the day, it's really about people, and the organizations that figure out how to do that well today will be the ones that will really be successful and thrive in the future. I also have responsibility for our resource groups in the organization. And we have 9 that represent a different makeup and communities, along with allies that represent the employee population. And I've always reminded folks that in the context of work, you have to put that label in the context of work. Yes, there are many things that make up our identity, right? And I think COVID taught us that the idea that somehow we're going to, leave, our personality or our issues or, these things at the door when we clock in at 9 and then pick them up again at 5 was fallacy, right? No one operates like that in the real world. I see some companies are trying to do that. Good luck with that, especially with this forced, back to the office, policy that a lot of folks have. But it's the idea that all of those things that shape and make my identity are part of who I am, not just from 9 to 5, right? But I also understand that in the context of work, there are some aspects of, what I'm doing that is not just about me, right? There's an enterprise and a business that needs to be run, right? And how does that look in terms of, am I getting the things that I need, right? Again, we talked about that. Your needs might be different, right? In terms of, we're both looking to advance into leadership. For you, you might need more leadership development in terms of the skills and the capabilities and, mentoring. And for me, it might look very different. I might need, an educational push, right? Those things are different, but we both have those needs in order for us to do what? To advance into leadership. So the idea that in the context of work, there's sameness and oneness, that's not reality, right? That is not the reality of the world and the workplace that we live in and work in. So you could have these diverse and divergent thoughts and opinions, right? Because I'm always reminding people the idea of in group and out group. Just because we all might be on a call and it's part of this particular resource group or community, including our allies, that doesn't mean everyone on the call is thinking the same way or having the same view about a particular topic, whatever the topic is, right? So we have to be very mindful and very careful about when we are creating spaces. I heard a term today that really resonated with me. There are safe spaces and there are brave spaces, right? So safe spaces, we can all come and have community and, feel that connection. And for the most part, there's a lot of agreement, right? And sameness in that. A brave space is the one that we create where there's no in-group and out-group. We're allowing all thoughts, all perspectives, respectfully and collegiately in the context of work to be able to be shared in that space, because everybody doesn't think the same and everybody's not feeling the same about the things that are happening in our workplace and in our world right now, for that matter.
And looking at the future of work, what excites you about the future of work and the direction HR is heading?
That is a fantastic question. I'll give you the HR perspective. What excites me about HR is the role that HR is playing right now and even growing into, right? I saw HR evolve from reactive, functional, at the behest of the business, manage people, that whole thing, right? To HR truly being more of a strategic partner, right? That's helping and informing the business to make really, really great workforce decisions. So, for me, that's exciting because I think that there's a reason HR, in all its functions that make up and centers of excellence that make up HR have the subject matter expertise that they do, right? The manager is not an expert in talent or compensation or employee relations and culture and belonging, right? So that excites me in terms of this larger role that HR has. In terms of future of work, we have to think about skills in a different way, Jay. This myopic, very kind of static way that we view skills, that's going to have to change. Otherwise, we're going to continue to see these gaps in terms of having enough talent, I should say, for the roles that are available, and watching some of these roles evolve. We're going to have to do a better job of getting people new skills, right? If you think about it like this, and I'll close with this in terms of how you asked. If you think about, every opportunity that you've had, every role that you've had, was it fully baked out? Did you have everything that you needed for that role? No, there were parts of it, yeah, you were ready for, but parts of it was really based on your potential, right? No one, I think, steps into a role, fully baked. I'm just 100% have everything that you need. Some of it is learning as you go, right? Some of it is not knowing at all and being able to fail and, fail forward, as they say, or fail fast and learn and go on from there. So I think that opportunity to reframe the way we look at skills, what's transferable skills, what's applicable skills, how we build new skills in individuals is really going to have to change. And I'm hopeful, right? Because I hear the term skills-based, everybody's like, oh, we're in a skills-based environment. I've yet to see that really, really operationalized and materialized. I think it's very trendy right now, but I think if we get there, we're going to be well positioned for the future. And quite honestly, relationship and human connection, that's going to be kind of the primary economy going forward. AI can do a lot of things, but AI cannot build human connection. can't build relationship.
I had a conversation with a fellow HR person earlier today, and his camera wasn't working and his battery is running low. He goes, Jay, if I do video of it, it's going to die during our call. He goes, so we're just going to have almost like a normal phone call like we used to do. And I'm like, what's wrong with that?
Right.
But, as far as AI, it's funny because my son is considering the trades and he's in high school right now, but so he's still kind of figuring out a lot of things. But he's like, I think maybe I'll do something with the trades, not sure what. And so, well, we named a few things, electrician, plumbing, other things. And I said, those are all recession proof because if your plumbing goes out, doesn't matter what's happening in the stock market, you got to get that plumbing fixed.
Get it fixed. That's right.
It's pandemic proof. We all knew that.
Yeah.
It's AI proof. AI might give him some models to do or maybe some ways how to improve his sales technique or something. But at the end of the day, AI is not going to be replacing a sewer line in your basement.
That's right. And listen, for what they charge, it's a great living because I've had plumbers come to my house and I'm like, how much? So it is a great, great living. That's
kind of what tipped the scale is we had something happen in our home a couple of years ago and the guy had the heart of a teacher. We interviewed 5 or 6 people because it was a major job. And the last guy came in, had the heart of a teacher, explained everything to me in plain English. As a non-plumber myself, I hired him to do it. And I showed my son after they dug up the cement floor. And I said, son, this is what they charged. And it took them 3 days. And his eyes like, what? I said, by the way, the owner that was here that priced out the job, I said, you notice he wasn't here. He was playing golf. That was his crew here because he's already been doing this for 20, 30 years at this point. Right. So... But
probably booked up for the rest of the month, right? So there's no shortage of work either. Yeah.
And I told him, and you said about building relationships, and this is just a personal example, but that was such a terrible experience of having to do this in our home that we hired this company, very transparent, helped us in a lot of things, and I said, "You're my plumbing company forever." I'm telling all my friends, all my neighbors.
Absolutely.
And the guy said, I don't do any advertising except my webpage. I don't take out Google ads or Facebook ads. He goes, it's all word of mouth. And he goes, it's been that way for years for me. And I said, if I have anything, even something minor, like I need this tiny thing replaced and I know it'll be easier to hire your team to do it and I get my Saturday back, then you guys got the work. And doing that, and that's what kind of led to a lot of, what does this look like? And that's when my son started taking an interest in some of this. But I've also had those conversations going, look, if you're going to do the trade school route, you need to consider maybe going to community college as well, or because you need to take a few small business courses because what they're not telling you is if you learn to trade, how do you get business development? Right. How do you learn to talk to customers? Right. People are probably going to be upset at the price of something, but you have to understand this is what things are, dealing with city officials, if you have to pull permits for is it commercial plumbing? Is it residential? Is it both? Are you going to be helping put in plumbing at a new arena or stadium? That's a whole different, skill set.
Absolutely.
So it's fun to have those conversations, whether it's, someone going a college route into a corporate environment or someone going into trade school and then working in the trades. There's not one right or wrong answer anymore.
Agreed.
And
yeah.
That's where we're seeing that, like you said earlier, what's the value of a college degree from 20, 30 years ago? Yeah. It's a hard question to answer.
It is. And that's why the skills piece is so important, right? Because, like I have 2 sons, older and then an 11-year-old. And as much as they are so connected and technology is integrated into their lives in a way that it wasn't in mine at their age, the way they view the world, though, and the way they consume information and the way they solve problems is very, very, very different. It's not wrong. It's just different because they are figuring things out and solving problems and managing and navigating their lives in a way that, it's that cross between what, their digital life and the physical, because I've seen them navigate both. So I think that's where we have to start thinking too. The generations that are coming behind us, right? Are we going to apply our same level of thinking and the same ways we process to how they approach things? We got to give them a little space and kind of see where it goes and provide some guidance and help them like you're doing with your son, provide some guidance and help them figure some things out. But at the same time, I think, they're bringing some really different ways at looking at the world and looking at things that that I think we should give them a little space to operate in and not just say, oh, well, this is the way it's been done, because again, if I apply that logic, when I started recruiting, it was paper and fax and one little DOS machine, right? Versus where we are right now.
You've had some major milestones, throughout your career. Have you ever had a rock star on stage moment where maybe it's like, oh, you were proud of yourself for something, whether it was a project, a promotion, a pat on the back, kudos, or something as special as someone remembering you on a Zoom call from 10 years earlier?
That's a really, really great question. I'll tell you about my first panel experience. I think that one stands out in this moment. So I remember being asked to do a panel. It was Tech Week downtown Detroit. One of my colleagues, he was invited to do it. And once he saw, like the prep, and it was more around, talent acquisition and workforce development, and it wasn't his space. And he said, call me Marv. He said, Marv, he said, nah, it's not for me. He said, this is all you. Let them know I have a colleague that's coming, and showed up, and it was in a loft space. I mean, everything was set up beautifully. And I'm walking in with even though I know my stuff, I've been doing it for, as many years I've been doing it. And I'm walking in with a little bit of apprehension and anxiety. And I've done presentations before in the organization to colleges and high schools. And this felt different though. And particularly when I looked at the lineup of the other panelists, it was a VP of a bank, it was a CEO of something else. And everyone had these great lofty titles. And back then I was a talent acquisition manager. Not that the title matters, but in my mind, walking in, there was a little bit of apprehension, a little bit of imposter syndrome that I felt walking into that moment. But once we got going and the first question was asked, and I heard the response from the other panelists, it's like, you have that first day of school when you walk into class and you think everybody's smarter than you till they say something. I was like, and once I heard, I was like, okay, so I am not out of my depth here. I do have a lot of, value to add to this conversation. And I think that moment for me was a turning point because it reminded me, particularly when you're asked or invited, there's something that individual or organization saw right in you. There was some value that they thought you can bring to that conversation or that space, and that's why they asked you. So I always walk into these spaces knowing that I'm bringing value, right? And a lot of times it's the values in perspective, right? Because you and I may have similar career trajectories, career experiences, but your perspective and what you bring is always going to be different, and there's value in that. So that was a turning point for me in terms of understanding the value that I have and the value that I bring through my experiences. It's a fantastic question. That one had me thinking.
What advice would you give to up-and-coming HR or TA professionals trying to make their mark?
You got to build your brand. That's the first thing. Got to build your brand. You have to build your brand. You have to find that thing that, some people call it your gift or your passion, right? Is that thing that you become known for, right? Within your organization first, that people, when they think about it, if they're sitting in another function or they're sitting in HR and someone asks, hey, I need to do X. So I'm thinking about X. You want to be that go-to, go talk to Jay. Right. So once you start carving out that space, that niche for yourself, you got to be able to advocate for yourself. Another very, very valuable lesson I learned that, the idea that you're just going to do great work and, people are just going to, always tap you on your shoulder and say, hey, fantastic, here's a promotion. That's not a reality. You have to be able to advocate for yourself and really guide your own career. Take control of your own career. So that's the first thing I would say. Second thing I would say, get a mentor. I wish I had taken on trusted advisors, call them your board of directors, mentors, and have multiple, right? Have internal mentors in terms of your career and where you see yourself going that can provide you, input and guidance on that. Have external mentors outside of the organization, right? That will give you a fresh perspective on things as you're approaching that career mobility. Yeah, having mentors, very, very important. It's something that I think this is a little undervalued. People don't take advantage of it. Then the last thing, and when I said build your brand, build it outside of the organization too, right? So places like LinkedIn and other spaces where professionals tend to congregate and collaborate, you want to build a presence there. LinkedIn being the big one right now, but there are other ways to do it, right? And then the last thing I would say is, there are parts of this that are going to be very, very clear. And there are other parts that are going to be very, very, you got to be able to operate in the gray, got to be able to bet on yourself and say, you know what, I'm not fully baked. I have about 70% of what's needed for that role, but I'm gonna jump out the window and figure it out, right? And that's risky and that's scary, right? But you have to be able to bet on yourself and know that the things that are in you that got you to this place can propel you to the next. And if it doesn't, guess what? I guarantee you're gonna pick up some valuable learning and some new skills and some new experiences that may not take you to that next place, but guess what? It's gonna propel you in space. Even if it means I'm continuing to learn and grow and develop in space, it's going to propel you forward in space.
I think the mentor part is really key. Like you said, your board of directors. I definitely have that. I refer to them as my board of directors or my kitchen cabinet full of people, and they're external and internal. And even as I've exited organizations, when I had internal mentors, some of them came with me metaphorically, where I stay in touch and I work with them saying, hey, I'm considering doing this, whether it's a career pivot or a different role, a different industry, maybe a similar role in a different industry, another certification, or just, hey, I wanted to pick your brain. Is there a blind spot that I'm just not seeing on this? Give me some honest feedback. And I have several people where it could be even dinners, a cup of coffee, a phone call, a quick text message, a long phone call, a Teams call because we're on different parts of the country. And it's really great because you really get a fresh perspective, and they will be honest with you, which is awesome, because it's like, no, even though we worked together 10 years ago, we stay in touch, and I saw this, and they might have a version of you from 10 years ago, but they've seen, whether again it's through LinkedIn or other things, he is excelling in A and B right now, but C is maybe where a little more focus is needed. So I think that is excellent advice, and I couldn't agree with you more on that. What's one myth about HR you wish you could bust forever?
We only care about the company. Like, I've seen that so many times. People have bad experiences and they go on LinkedIn and bash HR. HR is there to protect the company, not you. And HR doesn't care about the people. And maybe my experience is unique. Your mileage may vary. I have not had that experience from any of my HR colleagues. And when I say HR colleagues, meaning I've sat in HR through the people organization, but I've been exposed and needed HR and many different ways throughout my career. And I have not had that experience. And I think and I'm going to go out on a limb here and say most HR professionals, yes, they do care about the business and, kind of their role. And we said it earlier, to see that role of HR evolving, right, being more integrated with the business is fantastic. So they do care about that. But I really, really believe that people who choose an HR career choose it first because of the people. They didn't choose it because they want to just be business strategists and do everything at the behest and to benefit the business. I think they go into HR because of the people and wanting to help people. Somewhere they might have lost their way for some, but I firmly believe that most still care about people.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, we're employees too.
Exactly.
We still enjoy a robust benefits program, and whether that includes tuition reimbursement or flex time or some flexibility when you have a doctor's appointment or need to take a kid to a doctor because something happened. It's like, who wants to be a clock watcher when they trust you to get the job done? Like, I just need to log on an hour late today. I got to run to the doctor. But also too, I mean, you said they only care about the business. There could be a business leader that's pushing a new policy, and one, it could be out of compliance, and it's like, no, that changed a few years ago, and the HR's the voice of compliance or voice of reason saying, or it could be, we see a lot of RTO right now, return to office, but it could be they're pushing another policy that wasn't as favorable or good compared to maybe competitors, and HR steps in saying, well, this is what's trending, and this is where it's not going to cost us any more if we do it this way.
Exactly.
And we're going to get a better outcome. So sometimes when they do that, it could be, well, this is because, you didn't get it on a silver platter, but you got a platter.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the part I think sometimes people don't see, right? I've seen situations where very, very challenging situations, very difficult situations where HR folks have had to set aside what they're feeling in that moment because they needed to handle this situation with the care in terms of caring for the employee or employees, helping them navigate through that difficult process. And at the same time, to your point, making sure that, the way they're informing the business and how they're coaching and advising the business, to remain HR compliant, right? And not put the business at risk. That's a very, very difficult place to be in sometimes, right? Especially again, as you referenced, we're human. I'm still dealing with the emotions that I may have in that moment, right? As I'm trying to navigate, but I have to set that aside because I have to take care of everyone. So, the idea that, yeah, and I think we can wrap it up with this thought. I love what you said. HR people are employees too, and they're human too. So, give them a little break.
Marvin, how can people follow your work and connect with you or learn more if they want to get in
LinkedIn.
touch?
LinkedIn is always a great place to reach out to me. First name Marvin, last name Figaro. I am the only Marvin Figaro out there on LinkedIn. I've checked. You won't find another. So if you wanted to connect there, I'm open to connect with anyone. I've seen a lot of people connect with me thinking that they're going to sell me something through LinkedIn, and it doesn't work. You're not going to sell me on LinkedIn. We could develop a relationship. I'm
Oh,
hearing, what you're proposing, but the idea that you're going to sell me something on LinkedIn, and quite honestly, in a lot of cases, I don't own the budget, so you're talking to the wrong person anyway. But again, willing to connect with anyone and engage. And I believe in that idea of community, and the idea that we all benefit, right, when we're able to exchange ideas and share best practices and thoughts and all of that. I mean, I've many colleagues that I've never met in real life. The only exchange that we've had has been through either LinkedIn, or it flowed from LinkedIn into email, and and we've built community in that way. So definitely reach out to me there. Happy to make new connections.
I think we've all had those emails day in and day out where, hi, Marvin, I'm following up on our email from last week that you didn't respond to. Do you have 5 minutes to go over this new tool that's going to help you change your KPIs and reduce time to fill? We didn't have a conversation.
Exactly. You don't even know what my KPIs are. Thanks for wanting to change them, though. I appreciate that.
Okay, so speaking of human, I'd like to jump into what we call the encore section, where we get to dive into fun and personal questions to keep the human in human resources.
Let's do
So,
it.
Marvin, if you were to share your Spotify or Apple Music playlist, or whatever platform you use, what are some artists or bands we would find?
Again, really great question. I'll had a 3-hour trip last Friday afternoon. So on that'll be kind of the best representation of my most recent playlist. So on that trip, I had some 80s reggae and dance hall. So there was some Bob Marley in there, some Burning Spear, some old, Bounty Killer, like when he first came out, some Beanie Man that's in there, Buju. But I also had some 80s and 90s hip hop. I grew up in the West Indies, and the hip hop we were getting in the early 90s was really Tribe Called Quest, a lot of the backpack, if you will, hip hop. So that was 80% of the playlist. But I also enjoy kind of world beat, a little bit of world beat music in there as well. Some of the groups, I couldn't give you their name. I would have to go to my playlist. But if you think of, oh, there's this South African artist I'm drawing a blank on right now, but it's in that vein. I cannot remember his name to save my life in this moment. But it was that kind of vibe that I was on. A lot of times, if I'm in the backyard grilling or doing something like that, it'll be R&B, 70s, 80s. 90s R&B. Luther is always a great go-to. Prince, Isley Brothers. Yeah, I have a very, 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 and I want to make this plug. Not Avril Lavigne. She's Canadian. But there's this Canadian artist that I like her music. What is her name? Anyway, needless to say, I try to mix up the playlist and keep it a little bit keep it a little bit varied. Yeah.
What was the last show, concert, play, event you attended?
V at the Fox. Wife and I want to say it was Valentine's last year. Yeah, I have an oldest son, plays travel basketball. So most weekends I'm in somebody's gym somewhere, right? Either in state or within this regional area, Indiana, Ohio. Like this weekend, I'm going to Iowa. We don't get to do a lot of things that we used to, but yeah, SWV was the last concert and they were fantastic. Still, listen, 20 years later, live, incredible. And Carl Thomas, he's another one too. If people are into like 90s R&B, Carl Thomas live, incredible. Yeah, incredible.
What is a guilty pleasure of yours, whether it's a food, TV show, anything?
Like a good bourbon. I don't know if that qualifies. Yeah. I like a good bourbon.
Good
I used to
bourbon.
be whiskey, the Glenlivets, but I can't remember how long ago somebody turned me. It was many years ago. Somebody turned me onto bourbon, and I do enjoy good bourbon. Like in my everyday drinking price range, it's usually like the Woodfords, and but every once in a while, special occasions, I get to splurge on something a little bit more pricey. But a good bourbon, I think that might be my guilty pleasure. Maybe too much of a guilty pleasure. I need to scale back a little bit.
And what is a fun or unique fact that many people may not know about you?
A lot of people don't know. I used to be decent at golf. I actually have 2 holes in one, which is not easy.
I don't know anything about golf except when I try to play, I'm like Happy Gilmore style, or I go to Top Golf, I'm like that guy that can barely even hit the ball, or like the club goes flying, and then you're like, yeah, that's me.
Yeah,
I'm not opposed to learning, but
listen, it is one of the most challenging, fun, humbling, aggravating sports you can all roll up all into one. But I have 2. The first one was one of those aggravating, I hate the sport, I'm never playing again. Just took a wild swing at a par 3 and the ball disappeared and I thought it went off the green, only to walk up there and find it actually in the cup. So, and the other one, I really tried to get it on the green and got lucky and, ended up there. So I have both of them marked the dates on balls and everything somewhere around the house.
And then what is the last show you binge watched on Netflix or HBO, Apple TV, one of those platforms?
I started Daredevil, so I'm like 4 in right now on Disney. But the last one I had to binge watch in its entirety is Andor, and that's coming back. So I'm very, very excited about that.
So many choices with platforms. It's like, I don't even know how to keep up. I feel like we can get analysis paralysis. Like we could spend an hour and a half going through.
It is too much. And the worst thing is, like regular TV, I watch a lot of Discovery Channel, a lot of History Channel. That fascinates me. Ancient Aliens is another guilty pleasure in addition to bourbon, right? Like fascinated by that. But my friends and, we have a neighbor group that we hang out with. It's almost like every other day. Oh, you have to watch this. This just came out. I'm like, who has time to watch all of these shows? Like, it's impossible.
Yeah. There's an app too, where you could put shows you want to watch, and it keeps things organized. So you look at the app, because when you go into the platform, it can be so overwhelming. I'm like, who would have thought? An app for an app.
That's pretty smart.
Marvin, this has been wonderful to sit down and connect and, get to know each other a little bit more. We met at that conference recently and we hit it off, and glad we were able to connect there and talk, and really glad we were able to have this conversation.
Yeah, no, thanks for the opportunity. This was fantastic. Anytime you need me again, just let me know.
Yeah. If you found value in this, please be sure to like and subscribe and keep rocking HR excellence.